In the 1980s, General Electric became the most valuable company in the US under the leadership of CEO Jack Welch. He transformed the company into a powerful conglomerate that grew more than 30x, with the market cap of $12 billion going to $410 billion. One lasting part of Jack Welch's legacy was the introduction of stack ranking to improve employee performance by comparing employees against one another and identifying high and low performers. Most large tech companies actually still use some form of stack ranking today. I was a tech lead and manager at Meta, so I'm pretty familiar with how the performance review system works, and I've also talked to dozens of engineers at other companies through building Taro. In this video, I'll share why the old method of stack ranking has fallen out of favor, how and why companies are still effectively doing stack ranking today, and finally, I'll wrap up by sharing what you should do if you are an employee in one of these companies. The idea of stack ranking, sometimes called forced distribution, is that all employees are put onto a bell curve into different ratings. Exemplary at the top, meeting expectations in the middle, and needing improvement at the bottom. Traditionally, the bottom 10 to 15% of employees will get put on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, or they'll get fired immediately. This is colloquially referred to as rank and yank, which doesn't sound fun at all. Getting yanked feels like you're the unlucky chosen one in the Hunger Games, and you're being volunteered as tribute to satisfy this distribution. In a team of 10, the manager must identify one person who is going to get pipped or get fired, 7 people who are doing average, and then the 2 best performers. Based on that, you can immediately start to see problems that we'll talk about later. But first, I wanted to call out that stack ranking is still very much alive at any large company. Meta's evaluation system, called Performance Summary Cycle, or PSC, has a lot in common with the classic stack ranking. PSC is not as rigid as placing every single team on a bell curve distribution, but the fundamental idea is the same. Identify high and low performers. If you want the inside perspective on performance reviews and promotions, check out promotions.fyi. We're deconstructing how companies evaluate employees and how those ratings will translate to compensation changes. Very few companies actually advertise that they do any kind of stack ranking because it's widely known that it creates a really bad work environment. And I boil that down to 4 main reasons. First, at the start of the year, employees want to understand what does good look like, but the answer is not clear with stack ranking. Instead of getting evaluated based on predefined criteria, employees are measured against other people on the team. So it's unclear what good or bad performance looks like unless you compare yourself to the output of others. And that leads to the second reason why stack ranking is flawed, that it results in a toxic culture which hinders innovation and collaboration. When I know I'll be compared directly against my teammate, I have much less reason to help them. So instead of competing with other companies, you end up with employees who are competing against each other. One of the resulting incentives from this is that you have employees move to teams with less talented coworkers. Ideally, you want the smartest people in the company to work on the highest priority project. But stack ranking encourages employees to be the smartest instead of working with the smartest. Finally, there's a huge reliance on your manager in stack ranking. Your final rating relies heavily on your manager's perception about your contributions and also how good of a salesperson is your manager. If your manager is unaware of what you did or if they have some sort of bias, you're going to be shortchanged with a bad rating. Stack ranking ends up feeling zero-sum because it's so rigid. That doesn't mean it has no purpose. Stack ranking is a good fit for companies where the impact of every individual employee is clear. For example, in finance, it's sometimes possible to attach a profit and loss to each individual person. So for example, you could have a P&L on every trader. And then it becomes pretty easy to cut the bottom 10% of people based on their P&L output. But tech companies are much more collaborative, and it's very hard to quantify the impact of a single developer. Working in tech is a multiplayer game instead of a single player game. As a result, most tech companies don't officially use stack ranking, but they still need to rate employees. So the top companies still end up doing stack ranking, but they do it in a more politically correct way. Here's a thought experiment. At Google, one of the top performance ratings is an O, which stands for outstanding impact. Let's imagine a world where every single Google employee got the O rating. That would make no sense for 2 reasons. Number 1, at a practical level, there's limited budget, and giving everyone an outstanding rating means that everyone will get a substantial amount of extra bonus and equity. The company CFO is not going to be happy about that. Second, if you give everyone an above average rating, you've effectively made everyone average. That's going to result in your top performers leaving the company out of the unfairness that they're being compensated and rewarded at the same rate as people who have clearly done much less. This point is especially true in software engineering, where there's a very clear power law distribution. The top 20% of employees will typically do the majority of the work. So companies care a lot about making them happy. That's the whole point of calibration. Your goal is to identify who is a top performer and who is dragging the team down. If done correctly, however, stack ranking doesn't have to feel like the Hunger Games. When you're at a company like Fang, where you have tens of thousands of employees, then inevitably you're going to have people who are not that good at their job and they're low performers. And you're also going to have exceptional people, the 10x engineers. So the big difference is the scale through which employees are getting compared to one another. At Meta, there was only an expectation for a bell curve rating distribution at the larger organizational calibration. At the team level, I gave ratings relative to the predefined expectations for each employee, and that led to a more collaborative environment. This also allows for teams to be high performing. If everyone on the team is extremely productive, there's no need for anyone to receive a bad rating. Finally, let's talk about what you should do as an employee, given that every large company is going to have stack ranking in some form, whether they call it that or something more politically correct. In general, there are two approaches to the Hunger Games of stack ranking. Number one, you can tear people down. And number two, you can build people up and form alliances. I hope it's obvious already, but I strongly believe that the second approach is better. Helping people is better for your career. And that's actually the entire premise of Taro, a community of ambitious and helpful software engineers. When I worked at Meta, there was a saying, people get promoted in groups. The people I saw with the fastest promotions worked very closely together and shared advice and ideas. They fed off each other's energy, and that resulted in more ideas and more scope and ultimately more impact. What you need to realize is that with stack ranking, your goal is not to be the last person surviving. Your goal is simply to avoid being in that bottom 10% of employees who will get culled every cycle. This requires good people skills and deep relationships by adding value to others. Helping others is also tactically helpful for you because these peers will give you good ratings and promotions. Another tip for stack rank cultures is to evaluate your manager's ability to advocate for you. At any medium or large company, say more than 500 employees, your manager becomes very, very important. Can your manager eloquently describe what you've worked on and why it's important? And do they have the respect of their peers? If you don't feel like you have adequate support, you should find a different manager. One way to help your manager is to create a brag document. Throughout the year, you should write down what you've accomplished. This document should contain not only features you've shipped and code you've written, but also how you've helped other people, a coworker you onboarded, or an on-call process that you made way easier. The brag document helps both you and your manager acknowledge the impact of your work. Some people are repulsed by the whole idea of rating employees. Why can't we all just get along and succeed together? Unfortunately, that mindset is not in the best interest of large companies which need to compare performance between employees, and it's also not in the best interest of the top performers at any of these companies. Whether there's an explicit stack ranking like what General Electric had back in the 1980s, or a more modern version that most companies will have today, understanding how you can help you and your team is critical. Let me know what your experience has been with stack ranking, and better yet, check out promotions.fyi. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.